The couch is strange. That is the first thing he notices about the room, and it is the sort of thing you only notice in a dream. Not that the couch is wrong, exactly, just that it is strange, and then you let it go. The rest of the room is solid and steady. Those are his own words for it afterwards. Solid and steady. Then the lights start flickering. He knows what the flickering is. Somebody outside his sleep is sending him a subtraction problem, spelled out in Morse code, in the light. So he looks around the dream for something that can flash back. He finds a round bowl full of water, and the water flashes. Then the bowl breaks because while he is concentrating on the light, he lets it fall. All of that happened while he was asleep. Not half awake, not drifting off. Asleep, wired up, in rapid eye movement sleep, in a laboratory where somebody was watching the machine that said so. So here is the plain version of the strangest true thing I know about sleep. A sleeping person can be asked a question out loud, work out the answer, and send it back correctly, without waking up. That has been done, deliberately, more than once. And in a follow-up, some of them sent the right answer back and then woke with no memory of any of it. The answer arrived. Afterwards, there was nobody there who remembered giving it. Nobody has yet worked out whether there was anyone in there at the time. So the question tonight is, who is talking? I am going to ask it 5 times, each time from a bit further down, and I will tell you the answer now, because it is not a twist and you should not have to stay awake for it. Every answer is you. That turns out to be the strange part rather than the reassuring one. That is the whole shape. There is nothing at the end of this you are being asked to wait for. If you go under in 20 minutes, you will have got a whole thing and you will have known what it was. So, the sleeping man, the arithmetic, and no memory of it afterwards. The evidence for the first half of that is about as good as this field gets. 4 laboratories, in 4 different countries, working separately, 36 people between them, and a way of getting a signal out of a sleeping body, which is eye movements and small twitches of the face. Because the eyes are the one thing REM sleep does not paralyze. And the face keeps just enough movement to twitch. One of the sleepers said the voice felt like a sort of radio in the car. During the episodes where the sleeper had already signaled that they knew they were dreaming, the experimenters put 158 questions in. 29 came back correct, and those came from 6 different people. Most of the time, nothing came back at all, and that is worth saying. When they tried the same thing during ordinary sleep, with nobody signaling anything, 379 attempts produced 1 correct answer. Now, the part the retellings leave out, and I would rather say it in the same breath as the claim. The question went in from the outside. A different sleeper, in the American lab, 19 years old, who had had 2 lucid dreams in his entire life, was given 8-6 twice and got it right both times. So a sleeping brain took in a sentence it had never heard, held on to it, did the arithmetic, and pushed the answer out through the eyes. That is astonishing, and it is not the same thing as a dream knowing something you do not. Nothing in it came from inside. Which brings up the obvious objection, and I want to get there before you do, because it arrives on its own about 10 seconds after anybody hears the premise. Whatever a dream character says to you, you wrote it. You built the figure, you built the room, you supplied the voice. There is nobody else in there. That is not in dispute, and I am not going to pretend it is. But you cannot be surprised by something you already have, and the surprise is not only felt in passing. Somebody wrote it down and counted. The most careful record anyone has kept runs across 2 years and more than 40 lucid dreams, all by one man, an artist who would find a character inside a dream and ask it to draw something. He knew he was dreaming. He asked the question himself. He picked the moment, and the conclusion, in the study's own summary, is that even in lucid dreams, the dreamer is rarely, if ever, aware of what a character is going to say or do next. That is one participant, self-reported, with nothing blinded, and the authors say so themselves. Hold it at that weight. It is still the closest look anybody has had at the inside of this. So we start at the top, where it is easy, and we go slowly. Who is in a dream? Mostly people. Counts of dream reports generally land on 2 to 4 other characters besides you. In one character recognition study, 33 adults handed in 320 reports, and somebody counted who was in them. About half of the characters are named people you actually know. Some are identified only by their job, the policeman, the woman behind the desk. And about 1 in 6 is nobody at all. Not a stranger you saw once on a train, entirely unknown as far as the dreamer can tell. A person your own brain assembled, gave a face and a manner and usually a voice, and stood in the room with you, and you accepted them without a flicker of doubt, because that is what you do in dreams. Some of that talking comes out of the sleeper's own mouth, loud enough to be recorded. This is the part of the topic nobody uses, and it is the only place the conversation leaks out into a room where a microphone can hear it. A group in Paris, led by the sleep researcher Isabelle Arnolf, recorded 232 sleepers and ran linguistics on what came out. Most of them had come in because they do things in their sleep, which is how you get a microphone near this at all. 883 episodes of speech. Most of it, about 3 in 5, was not words at all. Mumbling, shouting, whispering, laughing. But there were 3,349 understandable words in there, enough to analyze. The grammar largely holds. The syntax parallels waking speech, and so does the sense, and so, they found, does the turn-taking. That last one is the detail that made me sit up. Sleep talkers do not monologue. Somebody says something and then leaves a pause, and the pause is roughly the length of a sentence, and then they speak again. The body lying there in the dark is holding a conversation. It is leaving exactly the right amount of silence for a reply that nobody in the room is giving. About 2/3 of people have talked in their sleep at least once. Around 6% do it weekly. And almost none of them remember, which is probably how you know about your own. If you know about your own. Somebody told you. You were informed of your own words by a person who was awake to hear them. And the words were yours, in your voice, and you were not there. So something in there has timing. Keep that because it is doing more work than it looks like it is doing. Now the second thing, and it is the strongest single result I have to give you tonight. In the year 2000, Robert Stickold's group had people play Tetris, hours of it, across days. Then they asked what those people saw at the edge of sleep, in the minutes when you are going under and images start arriving without being sent for. What they saw was Tetris, blocks drifting down, turning slightly behind closed eyes. That much is ordinary. If you have ever played anything obsessively, you may have had it happen to you. The people who matter were 3 patients with amnesia, extensive damage on both sides to the medial temporal lobes, the structures that lay down the memories you can consciously go and fetch. They played the game as well. They reported the same falling blocks as they fell asleep, and they could not recall having played the game at all. Not vaguely, not modestly. They were physically unable to retrieve it. The afternoon was gone from the part of them that answers questions, and the thing that was making pictures at sleep onset had it anyway. The authors put it carefully as they should. This suggests such imagery may arise without an important contribution from the declarative memory system. 3 patients. That is the size of it. It is still the cleanest demonstration in the whole literature of a sleeping mind producing material out of an experience its owner cannot reach, and it is worth being exact about what came back, because the exact version is better. It was not wisdom. Nobody's inner sage handed over a truth about their life. It was a shape falling because of a game they could not remember playing. So, is there anyone in there? At this depth, the shallowest one, the answer is yes, and it is a real answer, and it is finished tonight. Something is running. It runs well enough to take in a sentence it has never heard, hold it, calculate, and push a reply out through the only muscles it still has. It has timing, which means something in there is modeling a conversation with 2 sides and waiting its turn. It has a cast, commonly 2 to 4 a night, 1 in 6 built out of nothing, and it can reach material the waking person cannot reach, which we know because of 3 people who could not remember the game. That is more than most people credit sleep with, and it is where I want to stop, because of what is not in it. None of that is a dream character, knowing something you do not. Every piece of it shows the machinery running while the owner is away. The claim everybody repeats is a different claim and a much bigger one, that you can turn to a figure standing in your dream, ask it a question, and get back an answer that was not in you. It is the reason the subject has a reputation, and it does not rest on any of what I have just told you. It rests on something much smaller and much stranger, and the only honest way to find out how small is to go and see what happened when somebody in a dream was finally asked. Somebody eventually had the obvious idea, which was to ask them. It is harder than it sounds, and the difficulty is worth a moment because it shapes everything that follows. To put a question to a figure in your dream, you have to know you are dreaming while it is happening, and you have to still be carrying the question. That state has a name. Lucid. It means only that the sleeper knows from inside that this is a dream and can hold an intention across the knowing. It does not mean control, and it does not mean clarity, and the people who have it well are unusual enough that every study you are about to hear about is small. That is not a flaw somebody failed to fix. It is the size of the doorway. The man who went through it first, properly and repeatedly, was a German psychologist called Paul Tolly. He began working on lucid dreaming in 1959, and he never entirely stopped. He was a Gestalt psychologist by training, a professor at Frankfurt, and then at Braunschweig, and by his own account, he used his dreams as a practice ground for physical skills, which is a stranger habit than it sounds. He trained skateboarding and snowboarding in there. He also, at one point, knocked a dream figure down in a closed room, deliberately in order to see whether he would be punished for it. Nothing happened. He felt triumphant. Then he opened the door, and standing in front of it was a huge person with a hood over their head, who immediately lunged at him. I mention that because it tells you what kind of researcher was designing the experiments. Not a mystic and not a debunker. A man who tested things by doing them and wrote down what came back, including the parts that frightened him. In 1989, he published the study the whole genre still rests on. 9 experienced lucid dreamers, all men, carrying a set of tasks into sleep with them over several months. 92 lucid dreams recorded. When they met a character in a dream, they were to ask it to do something. Draw a picture, write something down, name a word the dreamer did not know, find a rhyme, make up a verse, do a sum. The characters were often willing. That is the first surprise, and it is easy to skate past. You might expect a figure asked to perform for a stranger to dissolve, or to ignore the request, or to turn into somebody else, which is the kind of thing dreams are supposed to do. Often they just did it. They drew, they wrote, they rhymed, and they made verses, which is a genuinely demanding thing to do on demand. And they did it while the person requesting it was asleep. Then there was arithmetic, and arithmetic fell over. In Tolley's earlier work, in 1985, not one of 60 dream characters could solve a problem whose answer came out above 20. In the later study, a few managed something, 5 times 5, 6 times 6, and in every one of those cases, the dreamer already knew the answer. The shape of that is the wrong way round. A dream character can compose a verse which no calculator can do, and could not, in Tholley's experiments, multiply 7 by 8, which every calculator can. The one class of task where a correct answer would be objectively checkable, where you could write the number down on waking and compare it to a fact about the world, is the exact class where the characters stopped being able. 22 years later, somebody checked. Stumbries and 2 colleagues recruited 12 proficient lucid dreamers, 9 men and 3 women, average age just under 29, through a German lucid dreaming website, and asked them to put sums to whoever they met in there. 18 reports came back containing 47 arithmetic tasks that could be analyzed. 13 of the 47 were correct, 20 were wrong, 5 were partly right, and 9 produced no answer you could score at all. Characters failed on 2 plus 2. Characters failed on 3 plus 4. The author's verdict, in their own words, is that dream characters are not outstanding mathematicians, and that their arithmetic abilities are no better than the ones of primary school pupils. Inside that paper there is one line that supports the famous version of this topic, and it is the only line in the numbers that comes close. So here is exactly how much of it there is. A couple of participants reported that they had not known the right answer themselves, and their dream character gave it correctly. The tasks were 66 divided by 6 and 15 divided by 3. That is 2 instances, self-reported, unblinded, in a field study of 12 people. And the same paper ran the comparison directly. Character accuracy when the dreamer knew the answer against character accuracy when the dreamer did not, and found no significant difference between them. That is the whole of it in the arithmetic. 2 divisions and a comparison that did not reach significance, which is smaller than advertised, and I want to be clear that I do not find it disappointing. I find it interesting because of what is sitting right next to it, which nobody quotes, the refusals. Asked to work out 8 plus 2, one character made a slightly irritated face, as though the dreamer wanted to know something forbidden, and did not answer with a number. She said, "Gray zone." Asked 18 minus 6. Another shook her head as if the question had been a private one, and said, "No. I would never give the answer." The report notes that she was fully certain about this. On 2 occasions, a character asked to do a sum simply ran away. One of them started to cry. And in Tolley's own record, there is a character who was asked whether it had a consciousness of its own, and which answered, "I am sure that I have a consciousness, but I doubt if you have one because you ask me such stupid questions. I am not going to do anything clever with that. It is testimony, one dreamer's memory of one moment, and it proves nothing at all about anybody's consciousness. But look at what the sleeping brain has produced. It has been asked for a number, and instead of failing to supply 1, which is what a broken calculator does, it has supplied a person who declines to supply 1 with a reason, with a face, and with an attitude about the question. It generates a social refusal where it cannot generate a 12. Whatever is running in there seems to be built for something other than the tasks we use to check whether a mind is working. Which brings us to 2025, and to the most careful look anyone has taken at this. Antonio Zadra, a dream researcher in Montreal, worked for 2 years with a 39-year-old artist named Dave Green, who is a long-practiced lucid dreamer. The procedure was simple and slow. When Green became lucid, he asked a dream character to make a drawing. On waking, he reconstructed what he had seen. Over 40 dream reports came out of it. And before I tell you what was in them, the size of the thing, one participant, self-reported, no blinding, no control. And the authors describe it as a phenomenological study, which is the honest word for a careful record of what one man experienced. Everything that follows is worth exactly that much, and it is still the best there is. The drawings surprised him. He is a working artist, so he is a good judge of a drawing, and what the characters produced was not what he would have produced. But more often than not, they came out in his style, his line, his hand. The author's way of putting it is that what the characters drew was more original than how they drew it. The content was not anything he could have predicted. The technique was his. And then there is the detail that I have not been able to stop thinking about. When a character sat opposite him and drew, the drawing came out upside down from where he was standing. He had to rotate it to read it. The dream had not simply produced a picture and put it in front of him. It had worked out where the character was sitting and rendered the page from that side of the table. Foley reported the same thing in 1989. Zadra had read that and set the condition up on purpose to see whether it would happen again in somebody else decades later. It did. The reports have other people in them, and they talk. A man in a trilby stepped in on behalf of a woman Green was pressing for a drawing and told him, "Look, mate, you asked the lady to do a drawing and she did. 1. Now leave her alone." 2 girls in a playground giggled and said, "You already asked us this last time." A chef, asked why he had drawn a character sitting on a teapot, said, "Because he studied drums at Columbia University." A character who looked like Green's friend Nathan complained, with some heat, about how many times they had to keep doing this, and then drew anyway. A woman asked why she had drawn what she had drawn said, "This is where I am from." And at that moment, Green's point of view slid into hers, including her Yorkshire accent in his own internal monologue. Zadra and Green are careful about what none of that means. They say plainly in the paper that nothing in it suggests dream figures are real in their own right or have states of consciousness of their own. Their actual finding is quieter, and it is the one this whole night is built on. Across more than 40 lucid dreams, over 2 years, with a man who knew he was dreaming and had chosen the question himself, the dreamer was rarely, if ever, aware of what a character was going to say or do next. That is the claim. Not that they know things, that you cannot tell what they will say next. It is a smaller claim than the one the topic is famous for. It is also, if you turn it over, a much stranger one, because it does not require anything unusual to be in the room. It requires only that a mind cannot see its own next sentence coming, and you have already been on the receiving end of it. Someone in a dream answered you, and the answer landed, and you did not feel yourself write the line. The famous version says something else. It says they know. That version came from somewhere. It came from one word said once by one person in 1989. The word was Orlog. It happened inside the study you have just been hearing about. One of the dreamers asked a character to give him a word he did not know. The character said, Orlog. He woke up and he looked it up, and it was a real word. That is the whole thing. One instance, one participant, one paper in a design with nothing in it to establish whether the man had ever come across the word before in his life. Follow most retellings of this subject back far enough and they arrive here. There is also a wrinkle in the meaning. Both of the scholarly retellings say he looked it up and found it was Dutch for quarrel. The Dutch word is oorlog with 2 O's at the front, and it does not mean quarrel. It means war. Which of those his dictionary gave him is not a thing anybody can settle without going back to the original paper, and nobody retelling it has. Now put that aside, because what is left is still worth having. A sleeping man was asked for a word he did not know, and something in him produced one, and it was a real word in a real language, and he could not have told you what it meant. That is a strange thing to be able to do. It is just not the thing it gets used for. What it gets used for is this. Years later, in an article written by a neuroscientist, the same single anecdote is carrying the sentence. They display knowledge and awareness of information that the dreamer could not possibly have access to. Verbatim and with no source offered, because there isn't one. The same piece keeps quarrel, never mentions war, and adds that quarrel perfectly characterized the tenor of the dream. I find that more interesting than irritating because it is not carelessness, and it is not one writer. Every story of this kind moves, and they all move in the same direction. The best place to watch it happen is the list of famous dream discoveries that gets recited whenever the subject comes up. So I want to take 2 of them properly. On the 11th of March, 1890, the German Chemical Society threw a party for August Kekulé in the Great Hall of the Berlin City Hall. It was 25 years since he had published The Structure of Benzene. Kekulé was 60 in poor health, and he spoke last. He told 2 stories that night, not one. And hardly anybody remembers the first, which is about riding home on the roof of the last London omnibus, sinking into reveries, and watching atoms flutter in front of his eyes and join into pairs, and then into chains, until the conductor shouted, "Clapham Road," and he woke up. The second is the one everybody keeps. He was in Ghent by then, in rooms with a study that looked onto a narrow alley and got no daylight at all. There I sat and wrote at my textbook, he said. But it did not go well. My mind was on other things. He turned his chair toward the fireplace. Long lines, twisting like snakes, and then one of the snakes seized its own tail, and the shape whirled mockingly in front of him, and he woke as if struck by lightning. The German word for what he sank into in his own text is Halbschlaf, half sleep. He was in a chair in front of a fire, at a desk he was failing to work at, and he never calls that state a dream. The founding story of dreaming your way to a discovery is a story about half sleep by a fireside, retold as a night's sleep ever since. But the half sleep is the small part. What he said around the 2 stories is the part that got lost. He had opened, before either of them, with leaps. They say that genius thinks in leaps, he told the room. Gentlemen, the waking mind does not think in leaps. That is not given to it. Then the omnibus, then the fire, and then on the very next page, this. Let us learn to dream, gentlemen, and then perhaps we shall find the truth. He is not a witness against dreaming your way to a discovery. He is its most famous advocate. He took the leap away from the waking mind in order to credit the other route, and then recommended it out loud. What almost nobody carries is the condition he attached in the next breath. But let us beware of publishing our dreams before they have been tested by the waking understanding. Dream, if you like, and then check it awake. That has been sitting in the same speech in his own voice for 136 years while the snake goes round and round. There is one more thing in that file, and I like it more than the correction. 4 years before that evening, an anonymous parody in a spoof of the Society's own journal had already drawn benzene as 6 monkeys seizing each other in a ring, which leaves a fork nobody has got past. Either the snake was already going round German chemistry by 1886, and the monkeys are a joke about it, or Kekulé heard the joke and made the snake out of it on the night. And the historian who defends him hardest concedes the plainest fact in the folder anyway, which is that Kekulé knew of Loschmidt and Cooper and Laurent before the evening the vision is dated to, and that any of them may well have made an impression he was not aware of. That is not a debunking. That is the mechanism, and it is the same mechanism this whole night is about. The other one I want is Ramanujan, and only briefly, because the primary source does the work. The sentence everybody quotes is not his. It comes from a biographical notice written by 2 friends for his collected papers, 7 years after he died. Ramanujan used to say that the goddess of Namakal inspired him with the formulae in dreams. Used to say, reported by other people, after his death. Hardy, who had actually worked with him, quoted that line at the front of his lectures in 1940, and then told the room in print that he attached no importance to it. The tongue, the scroll of blood, the goddess writing out the equations. None of it is in either primary source. The goddess is real, and she runs right through the family and never once through the mathematics. In January 1914, the last obstacle to Cambridge was his mother's consent, and it came the morning she announced that she had dreamed of her son sitting in a big hall among Europeans, and that the goddess had told her not to stand in his way. That is the only dream in either primary source in which a figure says anything at all. It is his mother's dream, and what it produced was permission to get on a boat. Hardy's line about all of it is the best sentence I found anywhere in the reading for tonight. There is quite enough about Ramanujan that is difficult to understand, he wrote, and we have no need to go out of our way to manufacture mystery. Which brings me to the one that actually holds up, and it is the one nobody bothers to check, because it is a pop song. Paul McCartney woke up in the attic room at the top of the Asher's house on Wimpole Street with a tune in his head. He had a piano next to the bed. He went to it and found the chords, and then he did the thing that makes this case different from the others, which is that he spent about a month going round people in the music business asking whether they had ever heard it before. His own words, "It became like handing something in to the police. And he thought if nobody claimed it after a few weeks, then he could have it." Richard Lester, directing him on a film set at the time, eventually told him that if he played that bloody song any longer, he would have the piano taken off the stage. It had a placeholder lyric about scrambled eggs and how much he loved somebody's legs. And McCartney still performs that version as a joke. So the dream itself is unverifiable, exactly like all the others. But its consequence is corroborated by 4 people who were standing there with nothing to gain, and the consequence was a finished melody with no words in it whatsoever. The words came later, awake, in a car, on the road from Lisbon to Albufeira. He was hunting for a 3-syllable opening. Da-da-da. Yesterday, suddenly, merrily. Yesterday, that's good. And then all my troubles seemed so far away, because the A sound is easy to rhyme. Say, nay, today, away, play, stay. He pieced it together out of that journey. The best attested dream discovery anyone has is a man being handed a tune and then having to write the song himself in a car. Line the famous ones up and ask what the dream actually delivered. And this is the whole answer. A snake, a melody, an experimental protocol for 2 frog hearts, and a set of formulae attributed by friends after the man's death to a goddess. Images and procedures. Not one of them is a dream character saying something to anybody. The most recited body of evidence for the idea that dreams tell you things you did not know contains, on inspection, almost no telling, and they drift the same way with retelling, toward a full night's sleep, toward suddenness, and toward somebody handing it to you. Kekule's half-sleep in front of a fire becomes a dream. A month of hawking a tune round London compresses into a morning. The tongue and the scroll of blood are in neither primary source, and they got into the story somewhere. They are not drifting at random. They are drifting toward the shape we want them to have, which is a shape where somebody hands it to you. And the tidy version of this, where careful science sits over here and nonsense over there, is not the geography of this field either. The first recorded signal sent out from inside a dream, an agreed pattern of eye movements at Hull in 1975, came out of a laboratory whose work was going into the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research. And the same 2 men in the same period ran experiments on telepathy. The evidence and the nonsense came off the same equipment, which is why the best record of dream speech in existence was made by somebody who never told a story about it at all. Emil Kraepelin invented the categories psychiatry still argues with. He is also the man who coined the term dream speech in a monograph in 1906. And that monograph sets out 286 examples of it, most of them his own. He went on collecting after it, almost entirely from himself, right up to his death in 1926. 20 years of sitting up in the dark and writing down what the people in his dreams had just said. The handwritten pages survive in the archive of the Max Planck Institute in Munich. One of them is dated May 1908, and what it says is Blair Blair. Ask why a man does that for 20 years, and the answer is better than anything in the Hall of Fame. He was trying to understand disordered speech in his patients, the kind where the grammar is running and the sense is gone. And he could not get anywhere because he never knew what the patient had been trying to say. There was no way in. The utterance was all he had, except in his own dreams. There, and only there, he had both halves. He had the broken sentence, and he had the thing he had meant by it, because he was the one who had meant it. He was not interpreting his dreams. He was using himself as the only case in the world where the speaker and the intention are both available for inspection, which is a very lonely piece of instrumentation, and it worked. By 1920, he had concluded that dream speech corresponds in every detail to the speech disorder he had spent his life classifying. It has been argued about ever since. 2 answers have been on the table ever since, and the question underneath them is the plainest one you could ask about any of this. Is the voice in your dream any good at talking? One side says no, and it says no in a very particular way. The grammar is fine. It is the meaning that has gone. Deirdre Barrett at Harvard has come at this from 2 directions. The literature people report composing in their dreams and the verbatim speech in the dreams of college students, and what she finds is intact structure, poor sense, and a great deal of rhythm and rhyme. Working a century later on entirely different material, she arrives more or less where Kraepelin arrived. The detail of hers I keep going back to is about what people bring home from a dream, when what they bring home is writing. It is almost all poetry. Prose is nearly absent, and where it does show up, it is a phrase or a title, 2 or 3 words, never a paragraph. Her reading of that is neat and slightly sad. A dream keeps the machinery poetry runs on, sound and rhythm, and loses the machinery prose runs on, which is holding an argument still while you check it. The parts of language that need somebody keeping track are the parts that go first. The other side says the opposite. Frank Hainick, whose doctoral work at Groningen was on the verbal side of dream generation, ran experiments with dozens of subjects and reports. In his words, that speech in dreams, as recalled, is ubiquitous, usually grammatical, often syntactically complex, and generally appropriate to the scenario. Patricia Kilroe went through 500 dreams and found no deficit of meaning. Her summing up is worth having, because it is doing something careful. In both structure and content, she writes, much of dream speech may pass for waking speech, although generally in shorter and simpler utterance forms, and even the oddities of dream speech, such as neologisms and nonsense statements, occur in waking discourse, either as unintentional errors or as intentional products of the creative use of language. I am not going to pretend that is settled. Named researchers, opposite findings, 120 years of it, no resolution, and part of the reason is that they are not all holding the same object. Remembered literature is not overheard dialogue, and a sentence you can still recite at breakfast has already survived a selection nobody controlled. David Fawkes, quoted in the same survey, drew the consequence in a line I think is the best one in the whole dispute. However visual dreaming may seem, he says, it may be planned and regulated by the human speech production system. Now notice what nobody in that argument is arguing about. Not one of them doubts that a speech production system is running in there. They disagree about how well it is running. And here that is all that matters. One camp thinks it is impaired, the other thinks it is close to intact, and both of them take for granted the thing that a person lying in the dark at this hour might not, that the sentences are being made live, on the spot by apparatus, not fetched off a shelf, made, and the apparatus is yours. So ask the question again from further down than last time. Who is talking? The answer you have probably had loaded since the first few minutes is the flat one. You are. You wrote it. Your vocabulary, your grammar, your memory of how people sound when they are being difficult. The character is a costume with your own language system inside it. And of course it knew the word. Because you knew the word. There is nothing to explain. I want to build that up properly rather than wave at it. Because it is not a cheap objection, it is the mainstream position it has been for a very long time. And it has had 3 good versions. The first is the oldest systematic answer anybody gave to this exact question, and it is much flatter than the reputation of the man who gave it, Freud, right at the start. Even speeches which are found in the dream content, he writes, are not new compositions. They prove to be pieced together out of speeches which have been made or heard or read. The words are faithfully copied, but the occasion of their utterance is quite overlooked, and their meaning is most violently changed. That is an answer to who is talking, and the answer is nobody. A tape spliced, playing in the wrong room. The man whose whole reputation is finding buried meaning in dreams took one look at the dialogue and said the dialogue is not composed at all, it is second-hand material with the labels swapped. Freud said that. Nobody has counted. Hynek argued against it from how well dream speech is built, but no one has run the content analysis that would settle it. And the reason is oddly practical. The standard systems for coding dreams count characters and settings and emotions, and none of them codes where a sentence came from. So the oldest claim in the field is also the least counted, which I find genuinely funny given how strong it is. Freud is asserting that nothing said in a dream is new, all of it cut from things you said or heard or read. That is not a mood. That is a claim you could go and check. And it is sitting there unchecked. The second version is the one that actually has the numbers, and it belongs to the strongest skeptic this topic has. If you want the hard form of you wrote it, you do not want a philosopher. You want the man who counted. William Domhoff has spent a career treating dreams quantitatively rather than interpretively, and his position rests on two findings that are, I think, more surprising than anything the mystical version of this subject offers. The first is continuity. Dream content in general, in his words, is continuous with waking conceptions and emotional preoccupations. Whatever your mind is chewing on while you are upright, it goes on chewing on it after you lie down, in dramatized form. The second is repetition, and repetition is the one that stops people. Dream life is astonishingly stable. In one journal of 904 dreams kept over 50 years, 6 themes accounted for at least part of the content of 76% of the reports. 6. Over half a century. The content barely shifts across adulthood. Some of it holds across cultures. Women dream of men and women about equally, and men dream of other men at a ratio of 2 to 1, everywhere anybody has measured. There is usually more aggression than friendliness in there. More misfortune than good fortune, and the emotional weather runs about 80% negative. Children under 5, woken in the lab, give reports that are static and bland, an animal or thinking about eating. What that adds up to is a prediction, and this is the part that ought to be uncomfortable. On Domhoff's account, a dream character is a dramatized enactment of your conception of a person, and not a source of anything. It can only tell you about your own concerns, because it is made out of them, and the entailment I draw is that it should be no better at anything than you are. Go back over what the experiments actually found, and ask whose prediction they match. Characters that rhyme and versify and cannot add. Drawings that surprised the dreamer and came out in the dreamer's own hand. A refusal delivered with real social poise by something that could not answer 3 plus 4. If you had put those results in front of Domhoff in advance, he would have shrugged and said yes, obviously. If you had put them in front of the version of this story that gets told online, it would have been wrong twice before lunch. He is right about far more than this genre ever admits, and the honest thing is to say so out loud, rather than build him as somebody to knock over. Here is the same point in a form you may be able to catch yourself in. Dream characters are frequently blends. A figure has the name and the clothes and the hairstyle of a friend, and your mother's face, and while you are in there, you do not notice, because nothing checked. The identity was assigned rather than perceived. Researchers link that to a drop in self-monitoring during sleep, and they say link rather than know. Your own material, assembled cheaply, waved through by an inspector who was not looking up. And when one of these figures does say something that turns out to be true of the world, It is worth remembering that 8 billion people go to sleep tonight, and that a run of direct hits is not the surprising outcome. It is the guaranteed one. So that is 2 versions of You Wrote It, and both of them are strong. There is a third, and it is the hardest because it goes after something you would not think was up for grabs. Daniel Dennett pointed out that we do not actually know that dreams are experiences had during sleep. His alternative is deliberately outrageous and very difficult to dismiss. Suppose the dream is not lived at all. Suppose that at the moment of waking, a whole finished cassette is dropped into memory, plot, characters, dialogue, and the sense of having been surprised by it, all pre-written, none of it undergone. There would be something it is like to remember a dream and nothing it is like to have one. The surprise would be part of the recording. There would never have been a moment of not knowing. Dennett was not claiming this is what happens. His point was sharper than that, and it is the sort of point that makes a field better. Ruling it out takes evidence, and nobody had any. Confidence is not evidence, and neither is how vivid it felt. The evidence arrived from the same equipment that gave us the eye signals. Once a sleeper can send a deliberate mark out of a dream, they can put one at the start of an activity and another at the end, and you can sit outside with a clock and measure how long that thing took in there. The durations broadly match. Whatever is going on in there is running in real time at about the speed you would expect it to run, rather than arriving complete at the door, which leaves the objection standing at full strength and rather taller than it was when we started. No visitor, no leak, no second knower. Your material, your grammar, your machinery, unfolding at ordinary speed inside a person lying still. And the question it was supposed to dispose of is still here, and it has quietly changed shape. It was, who else is in there? It is now, how can you be surprised by your own work? Because being surprised requires not knowing, and on this account there is nobody left in the room to do the not knowing. There is an experiment about tickling that answers this. And it is not a joke experiment. It was run carefully with a robot. And it is one of the very few places in this whole subject where a thing people usually argue about in armchairs has been turned into a number. I want to take it slowly, because it is the hinge of the night, and because what falls out of the end of it is the strangest thing I know about being a person. Start with the part you already have. You cannot tickle yourself. Everybody finds this out at about 6 years old, and nobody thinks about it again. Somebody else's fingers, badly aimed, through a jumper from behind. And you are gone. Your own fingers, expertly placed on the exact spot, and there is nothing there at all. Your hands are lying somewhere near you, and one of them could reach your own ribs without much effort, and there would be no point. And you knew there was no point before I finished the sentence. That is much stranger than it gets credit for. The skin on your ribs has no way of knowing whose hand it is. The nerve endings are the same nerve endings. The pressure can be identical. The movement can be identical. The spot can be identical. The only thing that has changed is a piece of information that lives nowhere near your ribs, which is who is doing it. And somehow, that piece of information reaches the sensation before the sensation gets to you, and takes almost all of it away. The standard account goes like this. Whenever you move, your brain does not only send the command to the muscles, it also makes a prediction of what that movement is going to feel like, and when the feeling arrives, it subtracts the prediction from it. What is left over is what you experience. Your own touch is predicted extremely well, because the thing predicting it is the thing that ordered it. So the subtraction takes out nearly everything, and what reaches you is a thin, dull, unticklish version of a touch. Somebody else's hand was never predicted, so nothing gets subtracted and you get the whole thing. I should say plainly that the prediction and the subtracting are the explanation the researchers offer. They are not a separate discovery. What actually got measured is how ticklish people said things felt, and that is the part that is solid. It is worth keeping those two apart, because the explanation is very good and very tidy, and there is a temptation to hear it as the finding. The finding is this: Sarah Jane Blakemore, Chris Frith, and Daniel Wolpert built a rig where a person moved a robot arm with the left hand, and that arm drove a second robot which stroked the palm of the right hand with a piece of foam. So the touch is yours. You are producing it, you are timing it, the whole thing is downstream of your own hand. But now the experimenters own the wiring in between, which is the point of the machine. First, they checked the ordinary result with the machinery honest. You drive it, or the machine drives it on its own, same stroke, same foam, same palm, and nothing in either one is startling. Self-produced touch came out consistently less ticklish, less intense, and less pleasant than the identical touch produced from outside. Nothing surprising there. That is the thing you learned when you were 6, restated with equipment. Then they put a delay in. Only a delay. Your hand moves and the foam arrives on your palm a fraction of a second later than it should. 1/10 of a second. 2/10. 3/10. Tickliness climbed. It climbed significantly between no delay and 1/10 of a second, and it climbed significantly again between 1/10 and 2/10, and at 2/10 of a second it had risen to roughly where the machine's own stroke sat. And then it stopped. Between 2/10 and 3/10 there was no further significant rise. It had arrived. The distance between your own hand and a machine, measured in the only currency this system trades in, is about 200 milliseconds wide. They did the same trick in space instead of time. Same rig, no delay, but the direction of the stroke rotated away from what the hand had ordered by 30 degrees, then 60, then 90. The same thing happened. The further the sensation drifted from what the hand had ordered, the more it felt like something being done to you. That is not a curiosity about tickling. It is a measurement of what ownership is made of, and the measurement is worth reading closely. The sensation is not reporting who caused the touch. It has no access to who caused the touch. It is reporting whether the touch was predicted, and it is treating that as the same question. And for your entire life, it has been the same question. Because in the ordinary world, the things you can predict at that resolution are the things you did. The system is using an extremely reliable proxy rather than lying to you. It is just that the proxy can be pulled off the thing it stands for, and when you pull it off, the ownership goes with the proxy and not with the fact. So here is an answer to a question that has been sitting under this whole video, and I think it is a real answer rather than a shrug. What does self mean in the only sense your nervous system has any use for the word? It is a tag. It gets applied to an event when the prediction of that event comes true. It is not a fact about who produced the thing. It is a verdict about how well the thing was foreseen, and those two come apart with 2/10 of a second of slack in the line, which does something to the objection we were left holding. Who is talking? You are. That has not moved, and it is not going to move. Every answer tonight is going to be you. But look at what we were assuming when we thought that closed it. We were assuming that authorship and ownership are one thing, so that establishing the first settles the second. They are not one thing. They are computed by different means, on different evidence, and only one of them is being reported to you. Authorship is a fact about causation, and you can only ever work it out by reasoning. Ownership is a fast, automatic judgment made out of prediction error, and it arrives already attached to the experience, with no reasoning available and no appeal. Which means the two sentences that seem to be in a fight are not in a fight at all. You wrote it. It felt like somebody else. Both of those are true at once, and there is no contradiction to resolve because they are answers to two different questions, and nobody ever promised the answers would match. Being surprised by your own work stops being a paradox the moment you stop treating one mind as one knower. The question was never whether you produced the sentence. It is which part of you had it before the part that is listening did. I want to be careful about how far I push that into the dream, because nobody has run the tickle experiment on dream speech, and I am not going to pretend they have. What the robot arm shows is narrower, and it is enough. It shows the tag is separable. It shows that the machinery which decides whether something is yours can be given the right answer about authorship and still return the wrong one. In a laboratory, in a waking adult, on demand. With a delay you could measure with a decent stopwatch if the stopwatch were fast enough. The objection assumed that was impossible. It is not impossible. It is a Tuesday afternoon with a robot. And this machinery is not a special-purpose tickle circuit. The idea underneath it is older than the experiment by well over a century, and it started somewhere completely undramatic. Helmholtz in 1866 was not thinking about dreams or selves or anything of the kind. He was thinking about eyes. When the image on your retina slides sideways, the brain faces a question with two answers and no way to tell them apart from the image alone. Did the world move, or did the eye? His answer was that a copy of the motor command goes out alongside the command itself and gets used to predict what the eye is about to see. If the prediction and the arriving image agree, the brain concludes that the movement was its own, and the room stays still, which is why the room does stay still all day while your eyes jump around it several times a second. The modern extension of that idea is where this gets quiet, and I am going to keep it quiet. Some researchers treat inner speech as a covert motor action, a thing you do rather than a thing you have, with its own copy of its own command and its own prediction. And on that account, some voices that people hear are inner speech whose self-signal failed. The phrasing in the literature is careful, and I will keep it. A self-produced phenomenon fails to be recognized as such by the nervous system. There is a proposed marker for it, a dampening of one early brain response to your own speech that shows up in people who do not hear voices and is reduced in people who do. That is a leading hypothesis, and it is not settled, and the people who write about it say so themselves. Some voices are better described as something built out of ambiguous sound in the actual room, and the field mostly reasons in the other direction anyway, from voices toward the model rather than from the model toward voices. So it is an idea with good machinery under it and an open verdict, and it stays that way here. But it is the same idea, and it puts three things that get filed in three completely different drawers into one drawer. A sentence you produced can arrive tagged as somebody else's. It happens in a dream where a character says a thing you did not see coming. It happens in a clinic where a person hears a voice that is not in the room. And it happens on a laboratory bench in a healthy adult when a machine delays a touch by 0.2 of a second. In none of those cases did anything about the authorship change. It was yours the whole time, in every one of them. Only the tag changed. And if that is right, The dream is not the exception. The dream is the ordinary machinery running in a room where the lights are off, and nothing is coming in from outside to keep the predictions honest. And this is not something that starts happening when you fall asleep. It is something that is happening now. So let us go and find it in the daylight, in a man who cannot remember the name of a street. He is trying to think of the street a relative of his lives on. It is an ordinary piece of information he has said out loud before, and it will not come. What comes instead is Congress, then Corinth, then Concord. He knows while he is thinking them that none of them is right, which is its own quiet oddity, and eventually he gives up and looks the address up. The street is called Cornish. Then he does the thing that turned this into 60 years of research. He puts his 3 failures next to the answer: Congress, Corinth, Concord, Cornish. All 4 begin with the same 2 letters. All 4 are 2 syllables. All 4 put the weight on the first one. He had not been failing randomly. He had been failing in a shape, and the shape was the shape of the right answer. The man is Roger Brown or David McNeil. Their paper says only one of us. This is 1966. People are still citing them, and they opened it by quoting William James, who had got there a lifetime earlier with no equipment at all. I will give you the passage as they print it, because it is better than anything I could write over the top of it. There is a gap therein, but no mere gap. It is a gap that is intensely active. A sort of wraith of the name is in it, beckoning us in a given direction, and the gap of one word does not feel like the gap of another. That is the whole finding, sitting there in the wrong century, waiting for someone to put a number on it. Brown's problem was that the state is rare and will not come when called. He and McNeil spent months watching for it in themselves and asking their friends, and the entire harvest was fewer than a dozen usable cases. They did not want their own experiences anyway. People had collected these before, in English and in German, and Brown and McNeil's objection to that older work is that the cases came from the investigators themselves and were analyzed impressionistically. A man notices something real going on inside his own head, distrusts his own noticing, and builds a machine to check it. The machine was simple. Read out the definition of a rare word to a room full of people and wait. 49 words, sitting right at the edge of an educated vocabulary, the sort of word you have met but do not own. Apsy, nepotism, cloaca, ambergrease, sampan. The definitions were edited beforehand so nothing in them resembled the target. 56 undergraduates, 3 evening sessions of 2 hours each, and the experimenters watching for the state to arrive. Their description of what it looks like from outside is the best sentence in the paper. The subject would appear to be in mild torment, something like the brink of a sneeze, and if he found the word, his relief was considerable. And when someone was in it, they did not let them off. They kept them in the torment and asked them about the word they could not produce. How many syllables does it have? What letter does it start with? Write down the other words arriving instead of it. 360 of these states were signaled across the sessions. 233 could be scored, meaning the real word was eventually established. So the guesses had something to be checked against. Those are states, not people. 56 people stuck 233 times between them. Number of syllables correct 57% of the time. First letter of the word correct 57% of the time, and 62% counting each word once rather than each occasion. So call it the first letter more than half the time from people who by definition did not have the word. Now, you could get a fair way toward 57% by being a clever undergraduate with a good feel for English. Brown and McNeil knew that, which is why the strongest thing in the paper is neither of those percentages. It is the control. They also had the intruders, the wrong words that arrived in place of the target, and the person still stuck sorted them blind into two piles, words similar to the target in sound and words similar to it in meaning. Both piles were then checked against the word nobody could reach. The sound-alike intruders matched the target's first letter 49% of the time. The meaning-alike intruders matched it 8%. On syllable count, it was 48 against 20. The wrong words were not simply wrong. Something was fishing for the target by its sound while the person sat there with no sound at all. And the knowledge is not spread evenly through the word. It is better at the two ends of the word than in its middle. And it climbs as you close in, so the nearer somebody is to producing the word, the more of the shape they can give. It surfaces rather than being handed over. There is a third finding everybody recites alongside the letters and the syllables, and the authors state it in their summary and then hedge it. It is the claim that a person in this state knows the stress pattern of the missing word, where the emphasis falls. They got a result on it, resting on 49 of the sound-alike words, which is not many, and they say plainly that the data do not meet the independence requirement. So they are left suspecting the stress pattern is known and not sure of it. They raise it about the whole study too and dismiss it. They call it a fragmentary data problem, and they went and consulted a statistician about whether they had any appropriate test at all, which is why I will take the letters and the syllables from these two and not argue. A man who tells you which of his own famous findings he does not trust has earned the ones he does. So something in there has the word and cannot give you the word. It can give you the length of it, and the letter it starts with, and the fact that its ends are firmer than its middle, while the word itself stays out of reach. That is knowing without access in a room in an ordinary person with numbers on it. It is not a story about a mystic, and it is not a story about sleep. It has happened to you in a kitchen over an actor's name. The easy version of this would end right there, and the easy version is wrong, so let me take some of it back. Do you always know the first letter? No. Two things say no, and both are more interesting than the tidy version. The first is that you can have the entire experience for a word that does not exist. Schwartz induced what are called illusory states of this kind by asking general knowledge questions that had no correct answer at all. Nothing was being withheld because there was nothing to withhold, and every one of the 31 participants had the experience at least once. I have that study from its published summary rather than the full paper. So hold it at that weight. But the feeling of a word being just out of reach can arrive over an empty space. The second is quieter and comes from the aging literature. Older adults report this state more often, which everybody expects. And they also frequently report a version of it called the empty gap, the same certainty that something is missing, with less of the partial information attached and fewer wrong words arriving to keep it company. The torment without the wraith. So the sentence people like to say that you always know the first letter is not true as stated. That splits the field, and the split is still live. One reading says the feeling reflects the real availability of the word. The other says the feeling is a judgment your mind makes from whatever is lying around, and like any judgment, it can be wrong. Nobody has closed that. But look at what survives the split, because it is stronger for having been through it. The feeling and the information are two different things. The feeling is testimony, and testimony can be false, and there is an experiment where it was false. In 31 people out of 31, the letters and the syllables are not testimony. They were written down blind and checked against the answer. So the honest form of it is this: the sensation that something is in there proves nothing. The shape, when the shape is there, is really there. Then what is going on? This is where the question stops being mystical and turns into plumbing, which is a demotion it thoroughly deserves. In Levelt's account of how a person produces a word, which is the mainstream account, it happens in two genuinely separate stages. First, the mind selects the item, which word this is, and what it does grammatically in the sentence being built. Then, a second system assembles its sound, the syllables, the instructions that reach your mouth. That order, every time you speak. A tip of the tongue state is a clean break between the two. Levelt's own phrasing is that the phonological code of a selected target item is temporarily, partly, or wholly unavailable, while the syntactic information is largely preserved. The word carrying the weight in that sentence is selected. The word has already been chosen. The part of you that chooses words finished its work correctly and filed the result. What failed is the errand to go and fetch the sound. And this is not a fault condition. The gap is there in fluent speech too, running too fast to feel. Using brain recordings in a Dutch laboratory on single words, the delay between a speaker having hold of a word's grammatical gender and having hold of its first sound has been measured at around 40 thousandths of a second. A tip of the tongue state is that same seam stretched out until it is long enough to stand in. So, who knows the word if I do not? The part that chooses words knows it, and that part has already finished. The part that fetches their sounds has not. Nobody came in, and nothing was kept from you by anyone. A choice was completed in one place, and a delivery ran late from another. And the only reason you ever find out those are two things is that occasionally one fails while the other succeeds. Which answers the question at this depth, and the answer is the one we had in the dark. Who is talking? You are, all the way down, exactly as before. But you at this depth is not a knower. It is at least two operations running at different speeds, and the one that reports is the later one, which is why it has to be told. When a word fails, the scene shows, and everybody notices, and they call it having something on the tip of your tongue. In an ordinary sentence, nothing fails, so nothing shows. The two are still two. One still finishes before the other, right now. How far apart is that far? It has been measured, and the method is almost comically direct. Sit a person in front of a picture of somebody doing something to somebody else. Ask them to describe it out loud and track their eyes while they talk. Then lay the gaze and the voice alongside each other and put one question to the pair. How long is it between the last time the eye settles on a thing and the moment the mouth says that thing's name? That interval has a name, the eye-to-voice span, and in Griffin and Bach's measurements, it came out at 902 milliseconds for the nouns doing the acting, and 932 for the nouns being acted on. Their own summary is that when speaking off the cuff, speakers began fixating the pictured elements less than a second before naming them. Under a second, about 9/10 of one. There is a small extra fact that makes those numbers mean something. If you show a person one object on its own, with no sentence around it, and simply ask them to name it, the average time from seeing to saying is around 910 milliseconds, which is near enough the same figure. In the middle of a flowing description, with the whole picture sitting there and every opportunity to look ahead, They were preparing each word about as late as they could possibly get away with. The gaze walks the sentence in the order the words will be spoken, roughly one word in front of the mouth, and it does not run on to scout the end. I want to be careful about what that does and does not show, because a tempting sentence is sitting right beside it. It does not show that you cannot say how your own sentence is going to end. Nobody has demonstrated that, and I am not going to hand it to you as though somebody had. What has been measured is when the machinery gets round to each word. The answer is late and continuous, and it happens while the mouth is already occupied with the front of the sentence, which raises the obvious question. If the thing is being built that late, at that speed, what happens when it goes wrong? Levelt has an older piece of work than the one about the sound of a chosen word, and its materials are so dull that the finding sneaks up on you. 53 Dutch speakers. Patterns of colored dots joined by lines described out loud so somebody else could redraw them. 2,809 descriptions. Out of that pile, he pulled every place where a speaker interrupted themselves and started again. 959 of them. One repair in every 3 descriptions, 18 per speaker, in people who were not nervous and were not doing anything difficult. Naming colors. The first thing he found is how fast they stop. He called it the main interruption rule, and it says a speaker halts the flow of speech immediately upon detecting the occasion of repair, where immediately means something on the order of 200 milliseconds or less, and halting means halting with no regard for where you are in the sentence or the phrase or the word. He has a speaker heading for the orange node who gets 2 sounds into the wrong color, cuts it in half before its final consonant, and restarts with orange. Not the end of the word, not even the end of the syllable. Whatever does the stopping has no interest in grammar. The one exception is that a word which was not the error tends to get finished. The second thing is stranger, and it is the one that carries this whole stop. The moment a speaker catches an error is often a long way after the error, and the chance of catching it rises sharply towards the ends of phrases. That is an odd shape for a system inspecting its own workings from the inside. It is exactly the shape you would expect from somebody listening. A quarter of the 959 change nothing at all. The speaker stops, says a small filler, or repeats a word, then carries on and produces exactly what they were going to produce anyway. Something was caught. Nobody can say what. His conclusion is one sentence, and it is worth having exactly. Speakers, he writes, have little or no access to their speech production process, and self-monitoring is probably based on parsing one's own inner or overt speech. Elsewhere, he puts it more bluntly and says the formulating processes are normally opaque to the speaker. And then the line that makes it click, which is that the advantage of a perceptual account is that controlling your own speech turns out to be like attending to somebody else's talk. The honest note goes here rather than later. The 959 repairs and their timings are the fact. The speaker, as his own listener, is Levelt's argument about the fact, and he is scrupulous about the difference, writing that none of the findings are remotely decisive in this respect. Best current reading, offered by the man who collected the data, and not a closed case. But if it is right, it says something specific about your afternoon. You have caught yourself misspeaking. Everyone has. You said a word and something in you went, no, not that. And you stopped and went back, and it feels like an inspection, like a part of you watching the works and spotting a fault. On this account, it was nothing of the kind. You found out what you had said the way the person across the table found out, by hearing it a fraction behind them, in the same room, which answers our question at this depth without changing the answer. Who is talking? You are, as always. But the you who finds out what was said has been sitting in the audience the whole time. So that is a word, and that is a sentence. Now, a night, because this is where everybody expects this to go, and the ground there is rockier than the reputation. Sleep on it, and the answer comes. There is one experiment underneath that entire genre, Wagner and colleagues, 2004, in Nature, under the title Sleep Inspires Insight. The task is a string of 8 digits transformed by 2 simple rules until you reach a final answer. And it is boring on purpose. What nobody was told is that every string had been built, so the last 3 responses mirrored the previous 3, which means the second response already is the final answer. Anyone who notices stops working through the string and just says the number, so the task timestamps insight to the trial. 3 blocks of training, then 8 hours of sleep, or awake at night, or awake by day, then back to it. 13 of the 22 who slept found the rule. 59% against 5 of 22 in each waking group, which is under 23. More than doubled, with both a night control and a day control underneath it. So neither tiredness nor time of day accounts for it. And in the same paper, the part that never travels with the headline. They ran a group who slept without training first, 5 of 20, near enough what the waking version gave. The 8 hours did nothing for people who had not already been working on the problem. Now, what happened to that result afterwards, which I think is the most interesting thing in this stretch? The same team went back to it. In a later review of their own program, they report a version where the night was split. The early night group produced 9 discoveries out of 29, 31%, and the late night group 5 out of 26, 19%. Their own written verdict is that 19% is certainly not more than the 20% their waking controls had reached. A separate group in 2017 replicated the effect in young participants and not in older ones. And an independent laboratory ran 77 people on classical insight problems and magic tricks across 3 hours of sleep or waking, and reported that sleep affected neither general solution rates nor the number of solutions accompanied by sudden subjective insight. The senior author on that null result is one of the co-authors of the original. There is also a flat note in the literature, made by people inside it, that none of the number reduction studies reported measures to prevent experimenter expectancy effects. That is the correction, and it is over, because what is left is better than what was taken. The roughly 20% who find the rule differ from everyone else in their brain responses to the task from the very first block, before any sleeping has happened. The benefit looks specific to people who had already picked the regularity up without knowing they had, which is the same shape as the untrained group getting nothing from a whole night. Sleep is not making answers. It is working on something you already had and could not yet say. So where does that leave the shower? There is a meta-analytic review of incubation studies. Incubation being the technical word for setting a problem aside and coming back to it. The abstract is as far as I got with that one, so the size of the effect is not something I can tell you. The directions that follow are quoted. Longer preparation before you stop gives a greater effect. Filling the gap with something cognitively demanding gives a smaller one. And the finding the authors themselves flag as surprising is that for linguistic insight problems, low-demand tasks did better than rest. Not rest, which is a kind correction because the folk advice survives it and comes out sharper. A shower is not rest. A shower is a low-demand task. It is warm and familiar. Your hands are occupied. There is a short sequence of things to do, and not one of them requires a decision. And you cannot read. The cliché turns out to be accidentally well-designed, for a reason nobody who repeats it has ever mentioned. And the instruction it leaves out is the one doing the work, which is that you have to have put the hours in first. One more measurement, the shortest and the one I keep turning over. 3 words: salt, deep, foam. Is there a fourth word they all point at? And can you say it? Ocean. Half the sets people are shown converge like that, and half do not. And the finding underneath the paradigm is that people sort the coherent ones from the incoherent ones, at better than chance even on the trials where they cannot produce the fourth word. Something registers the convergence without delivering it. In the study I am about to describe, that intuitive measure and the explicit one were uncorrelated, which is about as clean a demonstration as you get that they are 2 channels and not one. 30 people, which is small, so hold it loosely. They learned the sets, then either slept 8 hours or stayed awake, then made their judgments. Sleep raised the explicit solutions from around 41% to around 51%. And it lowered the intuition score. The author's own sentence is that sleep enhances the extraction of explicit knowledge at the expense of the ability to make intuitive decisions about semantic coherence. At the expense of, not a gift then, a trade. On this one measurement, in this one small study, the night did not simply make more of you available by morning. It moved something out of one form and into another, and what it took was precisely the ability to feel a connection you could not name, which was, until a moment ago, the thing we were calling the interesting part. And if that is what one night does with one small puzzle and 30 people, then I have to admit I do not know how much of me is built this way. Not the shape of it, the size of it. Nobody has yet handed me a number for that, which I would be willing to repeat to you. There are 2 numbers that get handed to you at this point, always the same 2, and I want to give you both and then put them down, because neither one is a measurement. The first is that 95% of your mind is unconscious. The trace on that, one ends not at an experiment, but at a book from 1999, which prints it with no citation and calls it the rule of thumb among cognitive scientists, meaning a thing colleagues say to each other. The line worth keeping, though, is not about sourcing. It is that there is no denominator. 95% of what? Neurons, watts, seconds, thoughts. Nothing could ever come back with 95 rather than 90, so the number never moves. Nothing could move it. The second is more specific, which makes it more convincing, which is the trouble with it. 11 million bits a second come in through the senses, and 40 of them reach consciousness. That is one table in one book, and its 2 columns are not the same kind of quantity. The left is what the nerve fibers could physically carry. The right is 1950s task throughput, and the 40 is worked out on the page from how fast somebody reads aloud. Done consistently, the columns come to 11.2 million and 77, and the author, who popularized them, says on that same page that the conscious figure is probably wrong and does not much matter. Somebody has since tried to do this properly, though, and what came back is more interesting than either number. Jung and Meister put the information throughput of a human being at about 10 bits a second, against sensory systems gathering something like 1 billion, and their own summary says the contrast between those 2 numbers remains unexplained. But read the method, and the word doing the work is behavior, They measure the entropy of what a person does in the next second given a defined task and subtract the noise. Their worked example is a typist at 120 words a minute, about 10 keystrokes a second at roughly a bit per character of English. Without a task, there is no principled way to bin the actions at all, and they raise the consciousness objection themselves in a section of their own paper headed with it, and decline it. This is not a measurement of awareness. It is a measurement of what a person can be observed to do. It is also argued with by name. Sauerbrey and Prushinsky replied in Nature Neuroscience that the brain works at more than 10 bits per second. Conceding the limit for high-level cognition and putting the high-bandwidth traffic in the unconscious real-time control of movement, which occupies most of the neurons in the central nervous system. So both sides of a live argument agree that the attending, deliberating, speaking part of you is slow, and disagree only about whether the fast, unattended part belongs in the total. I will not settle that. I will say that the famous ratio is an artifact of which two numbers you pick up. Run the same argument on the modern figures, and it comes out several hundred times larger than it does on the old books. So if you want a number, that is the number, and it is not a number about awareness, which leaves the question I have been asking all night standing where it was, only further down. Who is talking? At this depth, it becomes a question about proportion, and the way to get at proportion is to stop asking for a fraction and look at what has been caught running with nobody watching. 4 things, getting more concrete as they go. The first one you have probably done this week. You drive a familiar road and arrive with no memory of the drive. Nothing went wrong. The car stayed in its lane, the lights were obeyed, the turn was taken at the right junction. The driving was competent, and the person who could have told you about it was elsewhere. There is a name for the laboratory version of that, and it is expertise-induced amnesia. Baylock and Carr looked at skilled golfers' putting and found what they call impoverished episodic recollection of specific putts, which they read as evidence that skilled putting is encoded in a procedural form that supports performance without step-by-step attentional control. How many golfers were in it? I cannot tell you, because what I have read is the abstract and not the paper behind it. But the second half turns the subject around. They could make experts choke, and what eliminated the choking was not practicing under distraction. It was practicing while being watched, until being watched stopped mattering. Attention turned on the thing was the problem, which is the opposite of the story this topic usually gets told with. The unattended part is not a vault where the extra knowledge is kept. It is where the competence lives, and pointing attention at it makes it worse, which raises a question I want to keep hold of for the next 3. What sort of thing is it, and is it on your side? The second demonstration is the one I would put in the 95% place. And it is stronger than the thing it replaces, because a fraction with no denominator cannot be checked. And this one can. In 2014, Kuauder and Andriol and their colleagues taught people a very simple task. You hear a word, you press one button if it names an animal, and the other if it names an object. 18 people in one experiment and 18 in a second. They did it, lying back in a dark room. One word every 6 to 9 seconds, wired for recording, with permission to fall asleep, which they did. Sleep was confirmed. 2 ways, no response at all for 2 minutes, and the electrical signature of sleep on the recording. Here is the control that makes it work. Once they were asleep, they were played an entirely new list of 48 words, words they had never heard in the experiment, so nothing could be running off an association built up while awake. To sort a new word, the sleeping brain had to work out what it meant. There was no button press, there was no behavior at all. But there is a signal you can read off the scalp called the lateralized readiness potential, which is what motor preparation looks like from outside, and it tells you which hand is being got ready. Asleep, it leaned toward the correct hand. Animal words, one way, object words, the other. Their own sentence is that despite the absence of awareness and behavioral responsiveness, sleepers can still extract task-relevant information and covertly prepare for appropriate motor responses. A hand that knows the word is an animal attached to a person who is not there. Their own limit, stated in their own highlights, is that response preparation is slower in sleep than in waking. It is not free. But the chain from sound to meaning to a readied hand ran all the way through, with the part that could have told you about it switched off. Now, set that beside Domhoff, who has been right about a great deal of this. In 2017, he reviewed everything anybody has managed to get into a dream from the outside. Day residues, events manipulated before sleep, stimuli delivered during sleep, references to the sleep laboratory the dreamer is lying in. His verdict, in his own words, is that none of them is very influential, and most are trivial. What shapes dreams, on his account, is the intensity of personal concerns, not the events of the day. So which is it? A sleeping brain that computes the meaning of a word it has never heard and readies the correct hand, or a sleeping mind so sealed that the room it is lying in barely rates a mention? Both, and the reason is a distinction worth carrying for the rest of the night. Domhoff is measuring what turns up in the report. Cowder was measuring whether the machinery ran. Nothing in that experiment is a dream, and nobody in it experienced a word as far as anyone can say. The processing happened, and the reporting did not, and the two came apart cleanly. The third demonstration is from the same lab 3 years later, and it is the one that stops this becoming a comforting story. Andrian and his colleagues played sleeping people a made-up sound, a scrap of acoustic noise with no meaning in it at all, over and over across a whole night, and tested them on it in the morning. 20 people. Exposure during rapid eye movement sleep improved their performance the next day. The non-REM sounds were the only ones they never learned, even after a whole morning of trying. Different sounds, same night, same person. And depending on which state a sound arrived in the sleeping brain, either kept it or worked against it. Their conclusion is that highly selective memory processes are active during human sleep, with intertwined episodes of facilitative and suppressive plasticity, which answers the question this stretch has been circling. Is the part of you that runs unattended on your side? No, it is not that kind of thing. It has states, and in one of them, it takes what it was given and makes you worse at it. That is not a benefactor, and it is not an adversary. It is machinery being selective on a schedule nobody asked you about. The fourth is the most concrete, because it is not a signal averaged off a scalp. It is individual cells. Fried, Mukamel, and Kryman recorded from single neurons in the frontal lobes of 12 people, 1,019 neurons in all. These were epilepsy patients who already had electrodes in for clinical reasons, which is the only way a recording like this exists, and is also a caveat that travels with it. The task was as bare as it gets. Move a finger whenever you decide to, and report the moment you felt yourself decide. What they found was progressive recruitment of neurons over about 1.5 seconds before the person reported making the decision to move, and 256 cells in the supplementary motor area, one of the places movement gets prepared, were enough to predict the impending decision on single trials with better than 80% accuracy, 700 milliseconds before the person was aware of it. I am going to do with that what its authors did. They wrote that the scientific and philosophical and societal implications of these findings remain open for debate. And then they stopped. So I will stop there too. The people who had the electrodes in decline to settle it in print. What is left when you take the argument out is quieter and, I think, stranger. The deciding takes about a second and a half, and you are told at the end, you can check the shape of it in your own head. Decide to move a finger. The decision does not feel like it takes a second and a half. It feels like it takes no time at all because the only part of it you have access to is the notification. So, how much of me is running right now? I cannot give you a fraction, and I do not think anybody can, because there is nothing to divide by. What I can give you is the shape of the thing that has been caught. It is fast. It is selective. It computes meaning out of sound with the lights off. It sometimes deletes what it was handed. It finishes deciding before the part that reports has been told. And it is not withholding anything because withholding needs somebody to withhold from, which is starting to make the small, slow, late-arriving part of this arrangement look like the thing that actually wants explaining. So let us turn around and look at that part because it is the only thing left in this we have not looked at directly. The small one, the one that reports. And the first thing to say about it is that it does not run continuously either. In 2021, a group led by Thomas Andrelian put dense arrays of electrodes on the heads of healthy adults and gave each of them about 100 minutes of a long, dull attention task, stopping them at random moments to ask what their mind had just been doing. 3 options only: on task, wandering, or blank. 32 people came in, and 26 of the recordings were clean enough to analyze. What turned up in the electrical record was slow waves. A slow wave is the signature of a brain going into sleep, and these were not spread across the whole head the way they are at night. They were local, one region at a time, a few seconds at a time, in people sitting upright with their eyes open, doing a task, awake by every ordinary description including their own. And the timing is the finding. The localized slow waves accompanied the behavioral markers of lapses, and they came just before the reports of wandering and of blanking, and the pattern that preceded wandering was not the one that preceded blanking. Their reading is that these are local intrusions of sleep into waking, and the proximate cause of the lapse. Propose is their word, and I want you to have it, because what was measured is the waves and the timing, and what is proposed is the word sleep and the word cause. Take the measured part alone, and it is enough. The region of a person that was attending goes quiet in a way that looks like the beginning of sleep for a few seconds, and the person carries on and notices nothing. They notice the consequence. They never notice the event, because the part that would have to notice is the part that is gone. And then mind blanking, which is the strangest thing in that paper and possibly the strangest thing I can hand you tonight. It is one of their 3 response options, and it is a real, named, measured state. And the way they describe it is that the stream of consciousness itself comes to a halt. Not thinking about nothing in particular, not daydreaming, which has content in it. Nothing at all. And you have been in it. Somebody says your name, and you come back and they ask what you were thinking about, and the honest answer may not be that you have forgotten. On their account, there was nothing there to forget. All night I have been coming at the border between asleep and awake from the sleeping side. Something in there is running. It takes in a sentence, works out what it means, leans a hand toward the right button. Here is the same border from the other side in people who are unambiguously awake, and it is just as soft. Being awake is not one continuous condition you are either in or out of. It is patchy. Pieces of it drop out for seconds at a time, and nobody in the room, including you, can tell. So if waking is patchy and sleeping is staffed, a question comes up that would have sounded silly at the top of the evening. Which of the two is the basic setting? There is a serious answer in the literature, and it is a theory, and I am going to mark it as a theory now and again on the way out, because it is the sort of idea that gets repeated as a fact. Alan Hobson spent a long career on the physiology of dreaming and ended up proposing that rapid eye movement sleep is a proto-conscious state. That is his word. On his proposal, it provides a virtual reality model of the world, and that model is of functional use in the development and the maintenance of waking consciousness. He splits consciousness in two in order to say it. Primary consciousness is perception and emotion, which he ascribes to most mammals. Secondary consciousness is language, self-reflection, thinking about your own thinking. Dreams, on his account, have the first in abundance and do not strongly evince the second, which is his phrasing and a careful one. And in one respect, he thinks dreaming is the richer of the two. It has, in his words, the notable capacity to integrate highly disparate images and themes into a seamless scenario which your waking mind is conspicuously worse at. The part that carries the weight is developmental. Rapid eye movement sleep is running in a fetus months before there is any world to be conscious of. And Hobson's inference is that the proto-conscious state comes first, and waking consciousness is built on top of it. That is an inference from physiology, not an observation of anybody's experience before birth, because nobody has one of those. But take the shape of it. On this theory, the world-building part was there first, and runs all night, and requires nobody to be watching. And the reflective, question-asking part, the one doing the wondering, right now, is the recent addition, which leaves one thing to account for, and it is the thing we started with. Why can you not see it coming? If it is your own machinery running on your own material, why is the script kept away from the part of you inside the dream, even when that part knows it is dreaming, and asked the question itself? There are 3 current answers, and every one of them is a hypothesis. The first is threat simulation, proposed by Antti Revonsuo around the turn of the century. Dreams are rehearsal for danger, and rehearsal only trains you if you believe it while it is going on. The second is social simulation from Tuominen and colleagues, the same idea with other people in the place of the danger. And it too stops working if you know it is a drill. The third is the account Zadra and Stickold call Next Up, on which the sleeping brain explores novel associations between something recent and something older and weakly related, and monitors your emotional reaction to the story it builds. On that model, the reaction is the point of the exercise, so the story has to arrive unforeseen. 3 hypotheses, none established, and they disagree with each other about what dreaming is even for. But look at what they need in common. Every one of them requires the dreamer not to know. On all 3, the fact that you cannot predict what the character is going to say next is not a leak, not an accident of the plumbing, and not a sign of somebody else in the room. It is the specification. The surprise is the design. So, who is talking? 5th time, and this is the last time I am going to ask it. You came to this holding a picture with two halves in it. One half is you, a single thing that either knows something or does not. The other half is a suspicion that something else lives in there and occasionally speaks up. Half a hope and half a fear depending on the night. Neither half survives. There is no visitor, nothing here needed. One, and nothing found one. And the character is made of your material and speaks with your language system, which was never in dispute. But the other half goes too, and that is the part worth taking to bed. There is no single knower for a visitor to be hiding from. What kept turning up, in one experiment after another, is a mind that is several processes running at different speeds. The word is picked before its sound arrives. The hand leans toward the correct button while the person is asleep and can report nothing. The machinery of deciding is running about a second and a half before you get the notification. And ownership is not a fact about who made a thing. It looks like a tag applied when a prediction comes true, and 0.2 of a second of delay will take it off your own hand. Line all of that up, and the part that asks who is talking turns out to be one process among several. Not the fast one. Not the old one, not the one doing most of the work. It is small, it is slow, it arrives late, and it has spent its life being informed of what happened by machinery that had already finished. So the answer, the fifth time, is the answer it was the first 4 times. Every answer is you. It is only that you was never the name of one of them. The thing you were half afraid was a guest in your own head is the house. The part that was doing the worrying is the guest. There is a line I have been keeping since the beginning of tonight for this exact spot. One of the sleepers in those two-way conversation experiments, a 20-year-old with narcolepsy in the French laboratory, was dreaming he was at a party when the experimenters' questions began arriving. Afterwards, he described it. In my dream, he said, I was at a party and I heard you asking questions. I heard your voice as if you were a god. It was coming from the outside, just like a narrator of a movie. He was asked whether he spoke Spanish, and he was not sure how to answer because he was not fluent, though he had some notions. So he answered no and went back to the party. That is the whole arrangement, drawn from the inside by somebody who was in it. A populated running world, with a party going on, getting on with its work, and a small late voice arriving from somewhere outside it, sounding enormous, asking questions. And the world takes the question in and answers it, and carries on. Now the honest end of this, which is not mine, it belongs to the field. In 2024, the people who actually run this research, Mallet and Concord and Nielsen and Carr and Paller, published a review of where their own subject has got to, and they were harder on it than I would have been. Real-time reporting of dream content, they write, is a promising technique currently hindered by low success rates and biased population samples. Because the rarity of lucid dreams forces these studies to rely on narcoleptics and frequent lucid dreamers, which reduces the power and generalizability of the work. That is their own account of the evidence I have been quoting at you all night. And in the same review, this, a follow-up to the two-way communication work, saw accurate responses from dreamers who had no recall of it afterwards, raising, in their words, an intriguing question of whether that response was automatic and without conscious dream experience, or was indeed experienced in the dream but forgotten at the time of the report. That is their sentence, and that is where they leave it. It is an unusual position for a science to be in. They put a question in. The right answer came back out. On the record. On the machine. In the middle of the night. And nobody can say whether there was anyone in there having the experience of working it out, or whether it ran with the lights off and no one home. Nothing settles it, because everything we can measure is either the machinery running or the report afterwards. And this is exactly the case where those two came apart. The honest answer to the question this is all named for is that nobody knows. I am not going to improve on that, so I will leave it where they left it and put you back where we started. A man is asleep in a laboratory, wired up, watched. The couch is strange. The room, in his own words, is solid and steady. Then the lights begin to flicker, and he understands what the flickering is. And he goes looking through his own dream for something that can flash back, and he finds a round bowl full of water, and the water flashes and the bowl breaks because he drops it. Somebody in there found a way to answer.